The playground at Riverside Park fell silent at exactly 3:38 in the afternoon. A humid August wind moved through the trees like a blade wrapped in ice, and on the ground beneath the jungle gym, a 6-year-old boy named Oliver Valenti lay motionless on the wood chips. His lips were turning blue. Alessandro Valenti, a man 6'2" with shoulders broad enough to cast shadows, dropped to his knees beside his son. His hands that had signed documents sending men into darkness, hands that controlled the underground poker empire stretching through Philadelphia's warehouse district, these hands were trembling. Useless. Powerless. The world had frozen around them. Mothers clutched their children and screamed into their phones. Teachers stood paralyzed, their fingers hovering over their mouths. Pietro and Vinny, Alessandro's lieutenants in tailored black suits that cost more than most people's cars, pushed through the crowd but stopped dead when they reached their boss. Even they could not fix this. Even they could not will a child's heart to keep beating. Then someone moved. Mia Rivera came running from the bench where she had been sitting with Oliver's homework folder in her lap. She was wearing a faded yellow sundress with flowers still clinging to the hem from making Oliver's lunch that morning. Her dark hair, pulled back in a simple braid, swung behind her as she dropped to her knees without hesitation, without calculating, without fear. Her hands found Oliver's small chest and began compressions with a ferocity that made Alessandro's blood turn to ice water. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe, she said, and her voice was not shaking. It was clear. It was steady like a prayer being answered. She tilted Oliver's head back gently. She breathed air into his small body. She did not think about whether she was doing it right. She did not think about whether she deserved to touch the son of a man who had never noticed her name. She only thought about the fact that a child should live. Oliver gasped. His body convulsed once, twice, and then he coughed, a sound like a creature clawing its way back from somewhere dark. He cried out, a ragged wail that was the most beautiful sound Alessandro Valenti had ever heard in his entire life. The ambulance sirens howled through the neighborhood 3 minutes later, but Oliver was breathing. The paramedics arrived and checked him and said the words that would change everything: she saved his life. If she had waited 30 more seconds, he would have been gone. Alessandro stood motionless on the playground as the paramedics loaded Oliver into the ambulance. He was looking at a woman in a faded yellow sundress with flour on her hands. A woman he had barely noticed existed. A woman who slept in the converted closet on the 3rd floor of his mansion, who made his son's lunch every morning, who had never asked for anything except the $800 per month that barely covered her half of the rent she still owed on the apartment that had burned down 3 months ago. She had just given him back his entire world. But what she did not know was that the man watching her with eyes that had not held tears in 15 years was beginning to understand that she carried something inside her, a capacity for love without condition, for courage without calculation, for sacrifice without benefit. And in knowing this, Alessandro Valenti was about to discover something far more dangerous than any rival, any betrayal, any blade in the darkness. He was about to discover her. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 3 months earlier, when Mia Rivera stood in the ashes of everything she owned. The fire had started at 2:15 in the morning on a Tuesday. Mia was not home. She had been working the night shift at Harrow's Diner on 15th Street, clearing tables and wiping down counters for customers who barely looked at her. Her apartment, a studio on the 3rd floor of a building with crumbling brick and windows that rattled in their frames, burned down completely in 47 minutes. She learned about it when she clocked out at 6 a.m. and checked her phone. A text from her landlord, Preston Mercer: fire. Total loss. Insurance situation complicated. We will discuss rent. By 9 a.m., Mia had nothing. Not the photograph of her mother. Not the letters from her sister. Not the clothes folded in the dresser her father had built with his own hands before he left. Not the journal where she had written every dream she had ever allowed herself to have. Everything was ash. She had $200 in her bank account. The diner had promised her a paycheck on Friday, 5 days away. She was 27 years old and standing on a street corner in South Philadelphia with all of her belongings fitting into a single garbage bag. The shelter took her in that afternoon. It was a place called Harbor House, and it was filled with women who had nothing, women who had fled violence, women who had lost their jobs, women whose bad luck had accumulated like dust until they could not breathe. Mia sat on a cot in a room with 4 other people and did not cry. She had not cried since her mother died 8 years ago. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus when she was 19, heading to Philadelphia with $300 and a promise to herself that she would never let anyone hurt her again. On the 3rd day at Harbor House, a volunteer named Dorothy brought in donations. Shoes, mostly. Children's shoes that people had outgrown. Dorothy was sorting through them when she found a pair, small, white, perfect. Size 5. They looked like they had never been worn. Someone's child's first pair of shoes, Dorothy said, holding them up. Can you imagine? Someone bought these, so proud, so full of hope. And they only wore them a few weeks before growing out of them. Mia took the shoes and held them in her lap. They felt like kindness. They felt like proof that someone, somewhere, had believed in the future enough to buy white shoes for a small child. She kept them. By Friday, Mia had $847 to her name. The diner manager had paid her in cash. She had no apartment, no address, no prospects. But she had $847 and a pair of child's shoes and something stubborn in her chest that refused to break. That was when Eleanor found her. Eleanor was standing in the Harbor House lobby, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored blouse and tailored slacks, with silver hair pulled back in a knot so tight it looked like it hurt. She was 63 years old and had been a nanny for 42 years, first to families in Washington, D.C., then to families in New York, and now to one family in Philadelphia. "I need someone," Eleanor said to the shelter director, and her voice was like a violin, precise, controlled, capable of high notes and low ones. "I need someone who will move into the house, who will take care of my grandson. He is 6 years old. He has no mother. His father works all hours. I am too old to do this alone, and I am old-fashioned enough to know when I need help." The director looked at Eleanor, then looked back into the office where Mia was sitting holding a pair of white shoes. "I know someone," the director said. The Valenti house was located in Rittenhouse, on a street where the buildings were made of old money and darker secrets. The mansion was 4 stories, with limestone that had been cleaned to a pale gold, and windows that reflected the light in a way that made it seem like the house itself was glowing. Mia had never been inside a building so large that belonged to one person. Eleanor gave her the tour on a Thursday afternoon. The kitchen was bigger than her apartment had been. The library had books floor to ceiling. There was a room just for sitting that no one ever sat in. And on the 3rd floor, in a converted closet, there was a small bed, a single window, and a shelf where Mia could keep her things. "Oliver will be home at 3 p.m., Eleanor said. "His school ends then. He will be hungry. He will be loud. He will ask questions about things that do not matter. And he will need someone to care for him while his father is at work." "Where does he work?" Mia asked carefully. Eleanor made a small sound in her throat. "Everywhere and nowhere. He is a businessman. That is all you need to know. Do not ask him questions about his work. Do not listen to rumors about his work. Pretend his work does not exist, and he will do the same for your past. This is the agreement." Mia nodded. She had been poor long enough to know how to keep quiet. Oliver Valenti arrived at 3:12 p.m. that day, carried through the front door by a man in a black suit who was not Alessandro. The child was small for 6, with dark curling hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was holding a lunchbox shaped like a rocket ship. "This is Mia," Eleanor said. "She will be taking care of you now. She will make your dinner. She will help with your homework. She will listen to your stories about school." Oliver looked at Mia for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "Do you know how to make pasta carbonara?" "I do," Mia said. She did not say that she had learned by watching YouTube videos in the library's computer room, that she had never owned the ingredients before, that cooking for someone else had always felt like a luxury she could not afford. "Good," Oliver said. "My nonna used to make it. But nonna got tired. Now everything tastes like sadness." That was when Mia understood that she had been hired to fix something money could not fix. Alessandro Valenti could afford anything except someone who would stay. Someone who would love a child when that child's own mother had left. She moved into the converted closet that very day. Her room was small, so small that when she lay on the bed, she could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms. But there was a window, and through it, she could see a sliver of the street below. At night, the streetlights cast gold across her white ceiling, and Mia would lie there and think about the white shoes she had kept from the shelter. She thought about them like they were a promise. She would make herself into someone worthy of a future. She would save money. She would find a better apartment. She would become invisible enough to disappear from this life and strong enough to build a new one. What she did not know was that becoming Oliver Valenti's nanny had already written her into a story far larger than herself. What she did not understand was that on her 7th day in the house, Alessandro would come home early from the warehouse where cigar smoke mingled with voices that belonged to men who had made deals in blood. He would see her sitting at the kitchen table helping Oliver with his letters, her hand steady on the pencil, her voice patient, teaching a child how to write his own name. And something in Alessandro Valenti would pause. Would falter. Would remember what it felt like to believe that the world contained goodness. But that was still days away. For now, Mia unpacked her garbage bag into the converted closet and arranged her clothes on a single shelf. She placed the white shoes from the shelter on the windowsill where the light could find them. She had $847 to her name. She had a job that paid $800 per month. She had no plan except to survive. And she had absolutely no idea that a debt far more dangerous than money was about to become her entire universe. 3 months before Mia Rivera became the nanny who would change everything, she stood outside a building that no longer existed. The fire had taken 8 hours to burn itself out. 8 hours of watching flames climb through windows, of firefighters shouting coordinates into radios, of the smell of burning plastic and wood and everything she owned turning to ash in the August heat. Now, at dawn, the building was a black skeleton against a gray sky. Yellow tape cordoned off the entrance. 2 firefighters in turnout gear were coiling hoses, their movement slow and mechanical, the exhaustion of a night spent fighting something that could not be defeated. Mia stood 50 feet away, her arms wrapped around herself. She wore the same clothes she had slept in, gray athletic pants with a hole in the knee, a white tank top that had turned the color of smoke. Her left arm had a bandage from wrist to elbow where she had reached through a window that was no longer a window but a mouth of flame. The pain was there, constant and dull, like her body was reminding her that she had gotten out. That she was alive. That this was real. In her right hand, she held a child's first pair of shoes. White leather with pink laces. The toes had scuffed marks from 18 years of being stored in a box under a bed. She had grabbed them from the window ledge, the only object she had time to save. Not her clothes. Not her grandmother's photograph. Not the envelope with $847 saved by eating 1 meal a day and working double shifts at the diner. Just the shoes. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, approached slowly. She was 73 years old and wore her gray hair in a braid down her back. She had lived in the building for 41 years. Her grandson had been born in that building. Her husband had died in that building, in the apartment 3 doors down from Mia's. "I am sorry," Mrs. Chen said. She touched Mia's shoulder, and the contact, gentle, human, warm, broke something inside Mia that had been holding together all night. Her hands began to shake. The shoes trembled against her chest like a small animal trying to escape. "What will you do?" Mrs. Chen asked. Mia did not answer. She was counting. She had walked out of the fire with $200 in the pocket of her pants. $200. That was enough for a motel for 4 nights. That was enough to buy clothes that did not smell like smoke. That was enough to buy time, if she was careful. If she did not eat. If she did not sleep. My sister lives in Northeast, Mrs. Chen continued, her voice quiet, practical. She has a basement room. Small, but warm. You can stay while you figure out next steps. No money. You are family now because I say you are family. Mia turned to look at her neighbor, and Mrs. Chen's face was lined with kindness that seemed impossible given what they had both just lost. Mia wanted to accept. She wanted to cry. She wanted to be held like a child and told that everything would be different tomorrow. Instead, she said, I cannot take your charity. It is not charity. It is survival. You are young. You are strong. You will rebuild. But tonight, you need a place to sleep that is not on the street. The shoes felt lighter when Mrs. Chen spoke, as if permission had been given to stop carrying the weight alone. Mia stayed in Mrs. Chen's sister's basement for 3 weeks. The room was 6 feet wide and 8 feet long. There was a window at ground level that showed only the feet of people walking past on the street. She slept on a cot that had metal springs that sang when she moved. Every sound she made felt like an intrusion into someone else's kindness. On the 4th day in the basement, she walked to a temporary employment agency on Arch Street. The woman behind the desk had a phone pressed to her ear and a stack of index cards in her other hand. She looked at Mia's resume, waitressing experience, housekeeping experience, childcare from when she was 16 and worked in a daycare center for minimum wage, and made a single phone call. I have someone for the Valenti house, the woman said into the phone. Live-in nanny. Flexible. Available immediately. There was a pause. The woman listened. Her expression did not change. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., she said, and hung up. She wrote an address on a card in handwriting that looked like it had been learned a very long time ago. Go to Society Hill. Gate on the left side. Ring the bell. Ask for Mrs. Dominguez. She will show you the position. The Valenti estate occupied half a block. It was a 3-story brownstone with iron railings and windows that reflected the afternoon light like watching eyes. The gate was black wrought iron with decorative spears at the top. Beyond it, Mia could see a courtyard with a fountain that was not running, its water still and dark. She rang the bell. Her hand was still shaking. A woman in her 60s opened the gate from the inside. She wore a housekeeper's uniform, dark grey dress with white collar and cuffs, and had her black hair pinned back so tightly it pulled at the corners of her eyes. This was Mrs. Dominguez. You are the nanny, she said. Not a question. Yes. Come. Mrs. Dominguez walked through the courtyard without looking back to see if Mia was following. Mia followed. The sound of her footsteps on the brick was loud, too loud, the sound of someone who did not belong in a place like this. They entered through a side door. The kitchen was white and gleaming, with stainless steel appliances and marble countertops. A clock on the wall ticked the seconds with mechanical precision. It was 2:22 p.m. You will live in the house, Mrs. Dominguez said. She did not offer tea or water. Mr. Valenti travels often for business. Oliver is 6 years old. He needs routine. Structure. He does not sleep well when his nanny leaves. Previous nannies, they did not last. 1 month, 2 months, and they decide to find other employment elsewhere. Mia understood. Oliver needed someone who would stay. Someone who had nowhere else to go. You start at 6 in the morning. You finish at 8 at night. You sleep upstairs. Mr. Valenti's bedroom and office are on the 2nd floor. You do not enter those rooms unless instructed. The 3rd floor is his. You do not enter the 3rd floor. Mrs. Dominguez led her up a narrow staircase at the back of the house. The stairs were dark, windowless, a servant's passage from another century. They emerged on the 2nd floor, where sunlight poured through tall windows onto hardwood floors the color of honey. The boy's room is here, Mrs. Dominguez said, pointing to a blue door with a name painted in gold script, Oliver. Your room is here. She opened a door in the hallway. It was a converted closet. 6 feet wide. 8 feet long. A twin bed with a white duvet. A single window with white curtains. A plastic shelf. A bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. If Mia extended her arms fully, she could touch both walls. The bathroom is shared with Oliver's room. You are responsible for his meals, his homework, his bedtime routine, and his morning routine. Mrs. Dominguez, she paused, that is me, will handle the cooking for Mr. Valenti. You cook for the boy. Simple foods. Chicken, pasta, vegetables. He does not like seafood. He does not like spicy food. He likes strawberry jam on his toast but not jelly. Jelly makes him vomit. Mia nodded. She was writing this down in her mind, the details, the structure, the rules that would keep her employed and sheltered. She had nowhere else to go. She had $200. She had these shoes in her pocket. When do I start? She asked. Tomorrow morning at 6. Mia did not leave that night. Mrs. Dominguez showed her the kitchen, explained the schedule, pointed out where the boy's clothes were kept, described his favorite books. She did not ask Mia any personal questions. She did not ask where Mia had come from. She did not ask why a young woman with an empty expression and burned skin on her arm needed a live-in position with no time to leave. When the sun went down and the house grew quiet, Mia sat on the twin bed in the converted closet and removed the white shoes from her pocket. The shelter had been called St. Mary's Home for Children. She had been 9 years old. Her mother had been in the hospital after her boyfriend had broken her ribs in 3 places, and there was no one else to take her, so she waited at the shelter in a room with 7 other children on cots arranged in 2 rows like bodies in a morgue. A social worker named Patricia had sat on the edge of her cot. Patricia had kind eyes and wore a cross around her neck. She had held out a box. "These are for you," Patricia had said. "Your feet were always bare at home. I do not want you to ever feel like you need to be barefoot again. I want you to walk through life knowing that something is protecting you. Even when everything else is gone, you will have something that says you matter. You matter, Mia. You will matter your whole life." Mia had cried in a way she did not know how to do, her body shaking with a kind of grief that belonged to every child who had ever been told they did not matter. She had put on those shoes and felt, for the first time, like a human being might be able to survive. Now, 18 years later, she placed those shoes on the windowsill where the light could find them. Tomorrow, she would wake at 5:22 a.m. She would shower in the shared bathroom and try to make her burned arm look less obvious. She would meet a 6-year-old boy whose father was dangerous in ways she could not yet measure. She would begin a job that would pay her $800 a month, which meant she could save perhaps $200 a month if she was careful, if she did not get sick, if the landlord did not steal her paycheck like he had stolen everything else. She had no idea that this job would save her life. She had no idea that in 3 weeks, a man would come home early from the warehouse where cigar smoke mingled with the voices of criminals, and he would see her kneeling beside his son, teaching him to write his name, and something in him would break open like a door that had been locked for 15 years. For now, she lay on the twin bed in the darkness and watched the streetlights cast gold across the white ceiling. She thought about Patricia's words, "You matter," and she thought about the shoes on the windowsill, and she made a promise to herself that she would survive this. That she would become invisible enough to slip through this world without being destroyed by it. That someday, she would walk away from a place like this with something to show for her suffering. She had no idea that her greatest suffering was still waiting for her. She had no idea that in 72 hours, her new life would collide with a darkness so complete that it would teach her what it really meant to be invisible. The clock in the kitchen downstairs struck 11. The house settled into silence. And in that silence, Mia Rivera held her burned arm against her chest and waited for morning. 2 months had passed since Mia signed the papers that changed everything. The brownstone on Rittenhouse Square had become the only world she could afford to inhabit, a world of polished wood floors and rooms so large they echoed when she moved through them. She had saved $700 by rationing her meals, by wearing the same 2 uniforms she laundered each night, by refusing to spend a single dollar beyond what survival demanded. $700. It felt like a fortress against the dark. On a humid August evening, the air so thick with moisture she could taste it like copper, Mrs. Dominguez appeared in the kitchen doorway where Mia was preparing Oliver's bedtime snack. The older woman's face was carefully neutral, which meant something was about to shift. "Mr. Valenti needs this delivered to the warehouse district. Pier 23. The men will be expecting you." A sealed envelope appeared in Mrs. Dominguez's weathered hands. "Take the 38 bus south. Do not open it. Do not speak to anyone inside. Place it with Vinny and return directly home." Mia's throat tightened. She had heard the whispers about the warehouse district, the stories about men in suits arriving after midnight, the faint rumor of a place where serious money changed hands in rooms nobody was supposed to know about. She took the envelope, feeling its weight like a secret that could burn her. The bus ride south cut through Philadelphia like a knife through fabric. The city changed as they traveled, the tree-lined elegance of Center City giving way to the raw industrial landscape near the river. Warehouses rose up like sleeping giants against the darkening sky. Thunder rumbled somewhere over the Delaware, so distant it sounded like a warning. The warehouse at Pier 23 had no markings, no signage, just blacked-out windows and two men in black suits standing at a steel door as if they were sculptures meant to intimidate by their mere existence. The taller man with a scar cutting from his left eye to his jaw spoke into a radio clipped to his collar. The door opened without a sound. Inside, the world transformed into something Mia's small experience could barely process. The underground poker room existed in its own dimension, a cathedral of controlled chaos lit by golden pendant lights hanging from an industrial ceiling. Green felt tables stretched across the space in 3 rows, and at each table sat men whose clothing alone cost more than everything Mia owned combined. Silk shirts unbuttoned at the collar. Watches that caught the light and threw it back like captured stars. Stacks of cash visible on every surface, neat towers of currency that made her stomach turn hollow. Cigar smoke hung in layers, so thick the air itself seemed to be breathing. The smell was leather and whiskey and something else, the sharp metallic scent of money and desperation mixed together. Armed guards positioned themselves at each exit, their eyes missing nothing. A man appeared at her elbow. Vinny. She recognized him from her glimpses of the household, a man in his 50s with rings on every finger and a scar that pulled the left side of his face into a permanent sneer. His cologne smelled like a barbershop where criminals waited. "You the nanny?" His voice came out like gravel being pushed across concrete. She nodded, unable to force words through her throat. He gestured for her to follow. They moved through the room, and every man's eyes tracked her passage. She was a creature from another world, a woman in a modest blue dress moving through a landscape of excess, and her invisibility had never felt more visible. At the center table, a man was dealing cards with the precision of someone who controlled more than just a game. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that had just begun to silver at the temples. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so perfectly it looked painted on him. His tie was loosened, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and his forearms, rolled up to reveal skin and the dark lines of tattoos she could not quite read, showed the kind of strength that came from something deeper than gym visits. When he looked up, his eyes were the color of a storm sky, and they landed on her with the weight of something physical. "Leave it with Vinny," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, and it made something in her chest shift without permission. She placed the envelope on the felt table, her hand steady through sheer will, and turned to leave. But as she walked away, she heard a man's laugh, cruel, probing. "Since when do we trust nannies?" The response came immediately, ice-sharp and final, "We do not trust anyone." She did not know that man's name yet. She did not know that he was Alessandro Valenti, that he controlled an empire built on loyalty and ruthlessness, that he had not allowed anyone close enough to hurt him in 15 years. She did not know that watching her move through his world had created a question in his mind that would not settle. 3 blocks away, in a row house that smelled like mold and cigarettes, Preston Mercer was reviewing his files. He was a man in his 50s with thin lips that had never learned how to smile, cold grey eyes that calculated everything in terms of profit and leverage, and a body that had gone soft in all the wrong places. His polo shirt stretched across his gut. His fingers were stained with nicotine. He had been watching Mia since the day of the fire. He had seen her emerge from the shelter with nothing. He had watched her land the job at the Valenti house. And he had been waiting for the exact moment when desperation would make her do what desperation always made women do. Friday would bring that moment. Friday at 8 p.m. In his Fishtown apartment, where the walls were thin enough that screaming would echo like a trapped animal's last song. But Preston Mercer did not yet know that the cameras installed throughout the Valenti brownstone, cameras Alessandro had wired into every room after his brother's betrayal 5 years ago, were capturing everything. He did not know that the man dealing cards at the center table had already made 3 phone calls, one to a federal prosecutor who owed him a favor, one to an IRS investigator tracking Section 8 fraud across the city, and one to a property inspector who had been documenting code violations in Mercer's buildings for 2 years. The net was already tightening, though Mia did not know this yet. She stood at the bus stop on Columbus Boulevard, watching the river move under the fading light, holding the memory of storm-colored eyes and wondering what she had just walked into. The thunder over the Delaware grew louder. Rain would come before morning. The humid August air pressed down like a hand on Mia's throat as she stood outside the row house on Fishtown's narrowest street. 7:45 p.m. The building was a skeleton of peeling paint and broken dreams, its front door hanging crooked on hinges that hadn't been tightened in years. Above, the sky had turned the color of a bruise. Thunder rolled across Philadelphia like something waking up angry. She held the white leather shoes with the pink laces in both hands. The first pair Oliver had owned, given to her by the shelter social worker on the day everything burned. 20 years ago, that same woman had said 3 words, "You matter." Mia had carried those words like a prayer. Carried these shoes like proof that prayers sometimes get answered. But prayers don't protect you from desperation. Her hand shook. Not from cold, though the air was thick and suffocating. From the weight of what she was about to do. 18 years of surviving. 18 years of working doubled shifts and eating other people's leftovers and counting dollars like they were drops of water in a desert. And it all came down to this. A dark hallway. A man waiting. The same man who had been waiting since the fire destroyed her apartment and left her with exactly $200. Preston Mercer's voice had been patient on the phone. Patient like a trap. Friday at 8, he had said. My apartment. Alone. She had known what he meant. The knowledge sat in her stomach like something poisoned. Catherine had made sure of that. Catherine at the grocery store, whispering just loud enough for others to hear. Such a shame about Mia. Such poor judgment. I've heard she's been making some very questionable choices to pay her rent. Catherine at the PTA meeting, spreading the kind of lies that stick to women like tar. By last week, the whole neighborhood had decided Mia was the problem. Preston's leverage had become total. $47,000. That was what Oliver's surgery would cost. His heart condition had been a quiet killer, waiting inside his small chest for the right moment to strike. The social worker had explained it plainly, 12 days. They had 12 days to schedule the surgery or the waiting list would close. 12 days to find money that didn't exist. Preston Mercer had money. He had made that very clear. She took a breath. The air tasted like rust and rain that hadn't fallen yet. She thought about walking away. Disappearing into the city's invisible margins where women like her belonged. She had done it before. After her mother died, she had learned how to become nobody. How to move through the world without leaving marks. How to survive by being small enough that powerful people didn't notice you. But then she felt the weight of the shoes in her trembling hands. The small white leather pressed against her palms like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes. She took one step toward the door. And at that exact moment, 8:16 p.m., everything changed. The first sound was car doors closing. Multiple doors. Not gentle closings but the controlled, purposeful sounds of tactical teams deploying across the city simultaneously. 3 blocks away, at Preston Mercer's main office in Northern Liberties, 12 federal agents in dark tactical gear moved like ghosts through his filing systems. Special Agent Sarah Chen had a warrant that filled 12 pages, detailing offenses that stretched across 6 years. Housing code violations, financial fraud, sexual harassment and coercion, racketeering, witness intimidation. The filing cabinets opened like tombs. Inside, lease agreements with illegal clauses written in language designed to trap. Photographs taken without consent. Bank records showing Section 8 fraud totaling $920,000 siphoned from the federal housing program that was supposed to protect people like Mia. Digital recordings of threats. Lists of names. 32 women documented. 32. At the Fishtown row house, Preston Mercer stood in the doorway, silhouetted against yellow light that suddenly looked obscene. He smiled at Mia. A predator's smile. The smile of a man who had never faced consequences because men like him never did. Then the flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Preston's face transformed in 3 seconds. Predatory confidence became animal panic. He tried to move toward the back door, his hands reaching for an escape that wasn't coming. But Pietro was waiting there, leaning against a black SUV with his arms crossed. Pietro's expression was calm. Methodical. He was a man who had been trained in violence by someone who understood that violence was often unnecessary. Going somewhere. Pietro's voice was soft. Preston collapsed to his knees on the concrete before Pietro had to move. His whole body began to tremble. The kind of trembling that comes when the walls of a life built on cruelty suddenly crumble. When a man realizes that every evil act creates ripples, and those ripples eventually become waves. "I can pay," Preston gasped, his words tumbling out like something poisoned. "Whatever you want. I have money. Please." Pietro didn't respond. He didn't have to. The federal agents were already moving through the building, documenting everything, recording the man on his knees, capturing the exact moment when Preston Mercer understood that his empire had collapsed. Special Agent Chen snapped handcuffs on his wrists. The metal clicked. A sound like a door locking. She read him his rights in a voice that carried through the humid night air while news cameras, already positioned because Alessandro had made certain phone calls to certain journalists, filmed everything. Every frame. Every second. By the time Preston reached the black SUV, the footage was already uploading to news stations across Philadelphia. By midnight, Preston Mercer's face would be on every channel. But first, there was Catherine. The Greenfield Academy fundraiser was happening 18 blocks away in a marble lobby that smelled like wealth and jasmine. Catherine Mercer stood in the center of a circle of other mothers, wearing a designer cocktail dress that had cost more than Mia's monthly rent, holding a glass of champagne that caught the light like liquid crystal. She was laughing. That particular laugh that women like Catherine had perfected, the one that made others feel included and excluded in the same breath. Jennifer approached with her phone in hand. Jennifer's face had gone pale, the champagne forgotten. "Catherine, have you seen the news?" Catherine's smile didn't waver. "What news?" The confidence of a woman who had never imagined that anything she did could have consequences. Jennifer turned the phone screen around. Footage of Preston being led away in handcuffs. Headlines scrolling. Her husband's name. Words like fraud and coercion and federal charges. Catherine's champagne glass fell from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound was sharp, final, like a judge's gavel. The entire room went silent. Someone whispered, "Isn't that her husband?" Catherine's perfect face began to crack. The mask of social superiority started to slip. Before she could speak, Dr. Patricia Morrison appeared with 2 security guards. The academy director was a woman in her 60s who had built Greenfield Academy with standards. She looked at Catherine the way you might look at something that had died. "Mrs. Mercer, we need you to leave." Dr. Morrison's voice was ice crystallizing. Effective immediately, your family's association with Greenfield Academy is terminated. Federal investigators have contacted us regarding your involvement in witness intimidation and harassment. Your deliberate campaign to silence Miss Rivera was documented. You are no longer welcome here. Catherine's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again like a fish on dry land. This is a mistake. I didn't know. You knew exactly what your husband was doing. Dr. Morrison stepped closer. You helped him. Every lie you spread about that young woman. Every mother you turned against her. Every moment you used your social position to make her invisible. It's all documented. Every victim is being interviewed. This is not a mistake. This is justice. Catherine stumbled backward. The other mothers stepped away from her like she carried disease. Someone muttered something about being complicit. Another voice said they should have known. Catherine's voice rose to a shriek, cracking under the weight of her collapsing world. You don't understand. He would have left me with nothing. But the room had already turned away. Security escorts moved her toward the side door while phones captured everything, recording her breakdown for the evening news, for tomorrow's headlines, for the permanent record of her destruction. 3 hours later, at 11:19 p.m., Alessandro crouched in front of Mia outside the Fishtown building. His suit jacket had been abandoned somewhere. His white dress shirt was open at the collar, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and he looked less like a man who dealt cards at underground poker rooms and more like a man who had just spent the evening orchestrating the collapse of 2 people's lives. Mia was still holding the white shoes. Still trembling. You're safe now, Alessandro said. His voice was different than she had ever heard it. Gentler. Like a weapon being put down. You did this. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. You called them. I made phone calls. Contacted a federal prosecutor who had been looking for leverage against Mercer for 2 years. Alerted an IRS investigator tracking Section 8 fraud. Sent property inspection records that had been documented for months. His eyes met hers. Dark gray like storm water. But the evidence did the rest. Preston Mercer has been violating federal housing law systematically. Catherine has been covering for him. They both face a minimum of 40 years in federal prison. By tomorrow morning, every property they own will be seized. Every victim they silenced will have a voice. Mia couldn't speak. You saved my son. Alessandro's voice softened further. Did you think I would let them destroy you? I'm nobody. The word broke on her lips like glass. You keep saying that. He reached out and carefully, gently, took the white shoes from her hands. He held them like they were something sacred. Someone gave you these and told you that you matter. They were right. You matter. The weight of everything, 6 years of crushing poverty, the fire, the fear, the endless calculation of survival, suddenly broke open inside her chest. She sobbed, and Alessandro pulled her against him, his arms wrapped around her while federal agents worked around them and the humid August air finally broke into rain. It felt like mercy. Like everything broken in Philadelphia was finally allowed to heal. 2 weeks later, the morning light poured through the windows of a 1-bedroom apartment in Society Hill, touching hardwood floors that had never known Mia Rivera's footsteps before. The space smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Hardwood stretched beneath her feet instead of linoleum. Real walls separated the bedroom from the living room. No closet converted into a sleeping space. No landlord shadow in the doorway. Just silence and light and the kind of quiet that only comes when you finally feel safe. Oliver sat on the floor building blocks, his small fingers steady, his breathing easy. The surgery was scheduled for Tuesday. $47,000. Already paid. Alessandro had placed the papers on the kitchen counter that morning as if the amount meant nothing, as if saving a child's life was simply another decision made before breakfast. Mia had unpacked boxes containing new clothes, new books, new things that belonged to her. On a shelf against the wall, the white shoes with pink laces sat displayed like they were something sacred. Because they were. The knock came at 3 o'clock. Soft. Deliberate. Alessandro entered carrying more papers, his dark grey eye scanning the apartment with the satisfaction of a man who had decided something would be fixed and then fixed it. Vinny and Pietro remained in the hallway, their silhouettes visible through the frosted glass beside the door. Even here, even in safety, the machinery of his world continued its rotation. "Oliver's doing well," he said, moving toward the child without removing his cashmere coat. He sat on the floor beside the boy, watching blocks stack higher. The surgeon confirmed Tuesday. "Everything is prepared." Mia started to speak, but words tangled in her throat. Alessandro held up a hand. "It's not charity. You saved his life. This is the minimum of what I owe you." She pulled an envelope from her pocket. Sealed. Her handwriting spelling out his name. The letter she had written the night before the raid, the letter she was never supposed to send. "I need you to read this," she said. "Now." The sound of the envelope opening was sharp in the quiet apartment. Only the scratch of paper as Alessandro unfolded her words. His dark eyes moved across the lines, and Mia watched his jaw tighten like someone was tightening a screw directly into his chest. He read, "Alessandro, I have spent my whole life being invisible. I learned to move through rooms without being noticed, to take up as little space as possible, to never expect anything. Then I met Oliver and he asked if I was staying. And I met you and you looked at me like I was visible. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to be someone who matters. But I know I cannot put you in danger. Preston Mercer will not stop. Catherine Mercer has friends everywhere. If I stay, they will use me to hurt you. So I am leaving. This is the only way I can protect the two people who made me feel like I was worth something. Thank you for seeing me. I will never forget that. Mia." When Alessandro finished, his hands trembled. Just slightly. Enough that Mia noticed. Enough that Oliver looked up from his blocks, sensing something shift in the air around them. Alessandro's eyes were bright. Dangerously bright. Like a man whose carefully constructed walls had developed cracks he could not repair. "You were going to walk away," he said. "Not a question. To protect you. Mia." His voice was rough, ground down by something raw. "I have spent 15 years trusting no one. Letting no one close. Building walls high enough to keep out everything that could destroy me. Then you saved my son and I realized that the walls I built to survive were also keeping out everything worth protecting. You don't walk away from this. From us." He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his coat pocket, over his heart, as if it was something he would carry forever. Tuesday morning arrived with rain. The surgical waiting room stretched around them in shades of grey and pale blue, fluorescent lights humming like machines counting down the minutes of Oliver's childhood. Mia and Alessandro sat side by side for 6 hours while Vinny and Pietro stood guard at the door, watching their boss hold a nanny's hand with a gentleness that rewrote everything they believed they understood about power and control. 3 times, Alessandro stood. 3 times he sat back down without speaking. Mia squeezed his hand. She did not remove her fingers. Outside, the rain continued, drumming against the windows with the persistence of something that would not be ignored. When the surgeon appeared, her mask was already lowered, her expression clear. "The procedure went perfectly. His heart is strong. He's in recovery now. You can see him in 15 minutes. Alessandro's head dropped forward. His shoulders curved inward. And Vinny, standing by the door, saw something he had never witnessed in 15 years of loyalty. His boss was crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just tears that moved down his face like rain, like the walls had finally given way, like a man who had spent a decade and a half refusing to feel anything had suddenly felt everything at once. Mia squeezed his hand harder. Oliver woke asking for both of them. His small voice, still drowsy from anesthesia, called out their names in the same breath. Vivi. Boss. You stayed. Always, Alessandro whispered, reaching down to touch his son's forehead with one finger, as if confirming that the boy was real, that the surgery was finished, that the danger had passed. The television in the apartment was broadcasting the evening news when Catherine Mercer's sentencing came through. Mia, Alessandro, and Oliver sat on the couch together, the child between them, his small body warm and breathing normally for the first time in 6 years. The news anchor's voice was steady. Catherine Mercer received 22 years in federal prison for witness tampering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and racketeering. Her husband, Preston Mercer, received 41 years. Neither will be eligible for parole. The Mercer properties have been transferred to a victims' compensation fund. 12 women have come forward with their own stories of exploitation and abuse. The camera cut to footage of federal agents moving through a building. Boxes being carried. Locks being changed. The anchor continued, what began as one woman's courage to speak has exposed systematic abuse across Philadelphia's housing system. The FBI is investigating 17 other properties. Mia did not feel triumph. She felt exhausted. She felt relieved. She felt, for the first time in 18 years, finally safe. Oliver's small head rested against her shoulder. Alessandro's hand found hers in the darkness of the apartment, and no one spoke because sometimes silence is the only adequate response to justice. 1 month later, humid August returned to Philadelphia with the smell of rain hanging in the air like a promise. Alessandro and Mia sat on the brownstone's back porch while Oliver played in the yard below them, his movements faster now, his breathing easy. The evening was cooling. Stars were beginning to appear above the city. Alessandro spoke without looking at her. My brother's betrayal taught me that trust is the most dangerous thing you can give someone. That allowing anyone close is how they destroy you. I built walls instead. Became someone no one could touch. He paused. The rain began to fall, gentle and steady. Then you walked into my life and showed me that refusing to trust anyone is just another kind of death. Mia's response was quiet, measured. I spent 18 years believing I was invisible. That people like me don't matter. That the world is divided into people who count and people who don't. You proved that was a lie. He finally turned to face her. The rain touched his face. His eyes, in the darkness, were the color of storm water. You were never invisible. You just needed someone to look. Inside the brownstone, backlit by golden light, the white shoes with pink laces sat on the dresser. A relic of survival transformed into a promise kept. The child who received them was upstairs sleeping, his heart beating strong and steady, his breathing even, his future stretching before him like a road finally made safe. Preston Mercer sits in a federal prison in western Pennsylvania, counting days that will not end for 41 years. Catherine Mercer sits in a women's facility, her phone calls unanswered, her former friends silent, her social standing erased. Neither of them ever expected that the invisible girl they exploited would be the one to bring them down. Neither of them understood that power comes not from controlling the desperate but from seeing the people everyone else overlooks. This is the story of what happens when the invisible finally become visible. When a child's first pair of shoes becomes a symbol of worth. When a man who refused to love discovers that loving someone matters more than the empire he built. When a woman who thought she was nobody discovers she carried light bright enough to save everyone around her. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who feels invisible. Someone who needs to know that they matter. Drop a like if you believe everyone deserves to be seen. Subscribe because tomorrow we bring you another story that will change how you see the world. Comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Mia's place? How did this story make you feel? Every comment you leave is a source of light that keeps us creating these stories. We wish all of you watching good health, joyful days, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing you matter. Remember this, you are never as invisible as you think you are. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.